Well, hello and thank you for joining me for another Alex on Tech and iTWire video. I'm joined today by Ravi Shankar. He's a Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer at Denodo. Welcome to the program.
Glad to be here, Alex.
Now, we're going to talk about your appearance at Gartner and a range of different things, but can you just start off by telling us what does Denodo do in 2019? What is data virtualization?
Sure. So data virtualization is a modern data integration and delivery. So what it does is it brings together the data from a lot of different sources, and then it makes it available to the consumers in real time without having to replicate the data. So that benefits the companies by having the data immediately available at a much lesser cost and using far fewer resources. So it is gaining much more popularity.
So people would know about their own cloud services. They would know about Dropbox or iCloud or OneDrive from a consumer standpoint. But for companies, they would have data that is siloed in various applications. They'd be using Amazon or Azure or various different things. And in the past, people were collecting all of that data, sometimes replicating it, but what you're telling us is that you're connecting that data without having to run the risk of corrupting it whilst it's being copied and without having to have all those duplication costs.
Exactly right. Because if with the data movement, what has actually happened is that there is a plethora of data that is being authored from a lot of different devices, from different sources. It's no longer feasible to have them all in a single place. So you have to stop collecting the data and you need to connect to it. There's another concept called data gravity. The data gravity always is at the sources where the data is actually authored. We have been trying for the last 20, 30 years, artificially trying to pull that into a central location, only to find the data goes back to its gravity where it belongs.
Back in orbit.
Exactly. So it's time to yield the data where it actually resides in the sources and connect to them and have a virtual view of the data for the data consumers. That's what data virtualization does.
So when did Denodo come up with this idea? How many years have you been working on it and perfecting this process?
So we had actually started 20 years back. It actually started as a research paper in Spain.
Wow.
And the founder was the CEO. He was a professor at a computer science college. And one of his PhD students actually came up with the paper that they actually authored. So they had a vision in terms of how this would actually work, and they have been perfecting that over the years. Now, this technology is not something that is new. It has existed for a while. If you look at the Gartner hype cycle, it is actually the most mature technology. Now, the reason it's not that well known is because it has been called by different names. It used to be called as Data Federation. It used to be called as Enterprise Information Integration. So now data virtualization has kind of synced in, and a lot of companies are adopting it.
And I guess the most recent Gartner event last week on the Gold Coast was an example where a lot of the companies there were learning about it or already have been using it for some time. Tell us about what happened at Gartner and your experiences there. What were you doing there?
Right. So we were actually a sponsor at the particular event. This is one of Gartner's flagship event where they attract thousands of C-level audience over there. And one of the main themes that they talked about was basically digital transformation, how existing businesses transform to the digital age. And data virtualization is covered in the future of data management. So they actually talked as one of the top 10 trends. They talked about it in the future of data management. So they actually, to quote the analyst, he said it's going to be far more of connect and much less of collect going forward, and this technology is needed.
So I understand you've been in Australia for the last 18 months. How has the Australian expansion been going? And perhaps you can't name any customers, but what are the sort of industries? I mean, I guess it's any industry you can think of that is in the modern world today.
That is correct. So as a company level, we have customers over 30 different verticals. So Australia has been a premium market for us in terms of our growth, and we primarily target government, for example, financial services, mining industries, and so on. So we have customers in the education, we have customers in the government agency, and we also have customers in the financial services and in the banking and the insurance space. And very good use cases. So they're trying to understand, for example, one of the public university is actually trying to use our software to gain a single view of their students so that they can actually determine how exactly the students are kind of progressing in their degree, and what is it that they need to do to make sure that they graduate in the 4-year time frame or 5-year time frame that they need to do, and how they're kind of gaining, what courses they are taking, what grades they're kind of getting, so they're able to get a much better view of their students, so that because a lot of the measurement of the efficacy of the university and a lot of people registering actually has to come from such analysis, so they're able to do that much better with our data virtualization software. And we have another customer in the healthcare space that actually sends the nurses to homes where people, older age people who cannot really travel, and they actually use a HoloLens to actually interact with the patients, and the patients can actually interact with the physicians in real time virtually. So we actually bring the data from multiple different systems and make that available to at the point of care with the physicians at the time they are actually interacting with the patients, make sure that they have the holistic information about the patient so that they can provide the right care at that point itself. So we are kind of powering some of the critical capabilities within these organizations.
And that was using Microsoft HoloLens, you were saying?
That's correct. Yeah.
Oh, well, it's great to see that sort of those examples they had in their original videos coming true. And being used like that, because of, the virtual reality and augmented reality is something that really should be taking off.
That's right.
And so I know it would be different for every single company, but is there kind of a benchmark for how much more efficiently companies can run, sort of the money they can save, the quicker access to all of this stuff at their fingertips that you sort of share with your prospective customers that are like headline numbers?
Right. So one of our customers, usually it used to take about 8 months to deploy a full-fledged data warehouse. They were able to use the data virtualization and get the time in half. So they were able to create what we call as a logical data warehouse, and they got it done in 4 months. Before, a lot of times the reports that are available for the business users are not straightforward and can be used. They usually need some changes. And when such a change comes to IT, it used to take them 2 to 3 days to actually make the change. But now they can make the turnaround in 2 to 3 hours. Right. So there was a 10x improvement. So think about it. If you're doing different operations, like credit checks, loan verification, all those things, if it is 2 to 3 days, you're doing 10 transactions a month. But if it is in 2 to 3 hours, you're having hundreds of transactions. So we drastically improve the efficiency of the business operations.
And what is the platform or the dashboard through which everyone can see all of these disparate sources of data all unified?
It is all within their business applications. So we are kind of a plumbing in between the sources and the consumers. They would use the reporting solutions like Tableau, Click, and so on. They would use their own portals that they've actually developed. It will be a web-based application. So they would actually consume the data without having the knowledge of where the data actually comes from. So that's the beauty of the software. It totally abstracts the sources, the latency, and the format of the data. So
which is a great thing.
Yeah,
you don't have to worry about learning some new dashboard or interface. Your data is just there.
Exactly, yeah.
And, obviously, data virtualization is just one layer of a successful data plan. What other advice do you have for companies to enhance their operations using this and other useful strategies?
So people need to have a data architecture that's almost there in almost all companies that they have, but they need to build in flexibility into this architecture because the technology evolution is much faster. So today we talked about people moving to the cloud, right? And that is happening in a big way. Now the business has to go uninterrupted. Whenever there's a technology change, it's like shifting houses. You need to stop whatever is working, and then once it is enabled, then you restart it again. Business cannot afford to stop.
Downtime is killer.
Exactly. So that's where you put a data virtualization as an abstraction layer that allows you to kind of make the changes. So you would have your technology stack in terms of your analytical framework, your web applications, your cloud storage, and also your CRM, ERP, all those applications that deal with data quite a bit, but you inject data virtualization as that abstraction layer as a core part of your data architecture that allows you the flexibility to modernize your technology as you wish without having the business being impacted. So business continuity is very important.
Yeah, you can obviously add a new service that would normally have taken time to learn and integrate, and it's just there as part of the data streams that are now accessible via your platform.
Exactly right. You can add, remove whatever you want, and the business users get all the benefit in real time without any downtime.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm sort of surprised in a way. I mean, like you said, you mentioned about Data Federation, and this had different names. And data virtualization seems like such an obvious name for it, and
Right.
I'm glad to be learning about it, because for the last 3 or 4 years, the big trend, the big buzzword's been digital transformation, which
Exactly.
is, it's supposed to have been digitizing processes, and you hear about companies with robotic process automation, and I guess all of these things are all different parts of the puzzle to modernizing enterprises. And I just wish I'd heard of this earlier, but I'm very happy to be hearing about it now. So were there any interesting things you learnt at Gartner that were interesting about the Australian market, or just things that other companies are doing that you thought, we should be doing that too?
There was a new concept that they introduced, and the word that they introduced called tech equilibrium.
Tequilibrium.
So what that means is, like, you have two sets of companies. You have traditional companies, like, that have been in the business for a very long time, and they're going through digital transformation. Now there are digital companies like Amazon, for example, that started from the digital side, but they're kind of coming towards the traditional by building their own data warehouse. Not data warehouse, their own warehouses.
Yeah.
And
they're probably building their own data warehouses too, and have been for some time. But yes, physical.
And the labeling, white labeling the products. You can buy Amazon Basics.
Yes.
That's their brand name, right? So there is like a movement, from the two extremes, and they say like these two will kind of merge together or come to an equilibrium point.
Yeah.
And that equilibrium point will kind of depend upon the industry that you're in and so on. So it was a very interesting concept to know, but the whole point is, if you think about it, you need to be in business until you get to the equilibrium.
Yeah.
It is like, the digital guy is trying to knock you off, and you are trying to, let the digital guy not knock you off.
Yeah.
Right. So it was a very interesting concept that I learned there.
I remember hearing basically about that in a consumer way that everybody watching will understand. HBO was racing to become Netflix before Netflix could become HBO, and
Right.
vice versa.
Right.
And of course now they're kind of at that tech equilibrium stage. They're both organizations that create incredible content, and they both now have online platforms. And they're joined by Disney Plus and Apple TV Plus, and so it's there's a great equilibrium race happening in that space, and clearly in all of the enterprise spaces as well. Over the last 18 months since you were
Just
here,
to kind of interject.
yeah, please.
Funny you mentioned Netflix,
Yeah.
because the Netflix founder was one of the keynote speakers at Gartner.
Well, there you go.
So he was actually saying that how when the company was founded with
Which was
Reid
just
Hoffman.
DVDs,
Reid Hoffman. So this was Mark Robinson.
Yeah.
So they were trying to sell the company because it was not a very viable business to Blockbuster.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah,
For $50
famous.
million,
That's it, famous story.
and Blockbuster laughed them out of the door.
Yeah.
And they put them out of business.
That's right.
So
Well, we know
interesting story.
who won that particular race. That's right. I mean, I think the other day in Australia, the last Blockbuster closed down. So it's still renting a few tapes. So you've been to Australia before?
Yes.
Yeah. So how has the market changed in the time that you were here last? Have we accelerated?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I see a lot of cloud adoption. So Australia is one of the pioneers in terms of the cloud side. So I see a lot of companies kind of going through the transformation of adopting cloud. Microsoft is pretty big with their Azure platform over here, and AWS is also trying to make its way through. So I see a big technology jump, and companies who are aiding the transformation from the on-premises to the cloud are having a big boost in terms of the business and adding more resources to enable that market. So that is a big shift that I'm actually seeing in the Australian market.
Are there any mistakes that companies are making by moving too quickly or ignoring certain things that they really should focus on in their journey to the cloud, or into adopting new things like not that it's new as such, but new things like Denodo?
Right. So one of the things, like people in the spirit of trying to move fast that they can actually do is they might be doing piecemeal stuff, very tactical. So I'm going to take this database that I've been running for the last 20, 30 years. I'm going to move to now a cloud object store, so they can talk about it that particular way. But importantly, they need to have a strategy in place of how they're going to enable not just one database, but the entire data landscape. So that's where like data virtualization is very key to kind of put that architecture in place with the agility and the future in mind, that will enable them not only just transform one single data storage, but like the entire data landscape and all the applications.
Well, like you were saying, Denodo is a very mature solution. It's not something that's new. It's been worked on for 2 decades. And so what you're saying to people is they can have the confidence that they don't have to go bit by bit, but they can actually virtualize the lot faster than they can think and get the advantages quicker than they think, and suddenly they're more profitable and more efficient.
Exactly right. We have very large companies that have billions of dollars in revenue and are in basically like tens of different countries all over the world. They have very complex systems, and they have adopted this technology, and that itself is a proof point of this technology being able to cater to some of the critical business processes.
Now, I have three questions that I always like to finish on, and one is about the future. So, look, obviously, if we all knew what the future was, we'd be sitting on a beach in the Bahamas drinking pina coladas with billions in our bank accounts. But if you were to look in the crystal ball, how do you think data virtualization, the cloud, how do you think the industry will evolve over the next 10 years to, say, 2029?
Sure. So the industry is always going to, like the tech equilibrium that we talked about, always going to gravitate towards autonomous stuff, right? So you want to automate the manual things. Like ever since you can go back in history and you can see from the manual production to like the industrial age and so on, automation has always been the key. The same thing is happening right now in the digital business. And AI, which I learned 30 years back in my undergraduate in computer science, was in lull for a long time. Now it is kind of picking up quite a bit. So they're going to use a lot of that technology to actually automate and use it to improve the efficiency and productivity. A lot of people actually misconstrue that it's going to put them out of business. No, it is going to make them much more efficient. Think about it. Like you're the banker, if you are going to take 2 to 3 days to do a loan verification because of your manual stuff, now it's been automated and you can do the same thing in 2 to 3 hours. How much productivity will improve?
As you said before, it's massive, 10 times.
There are a lot of work, and you want to be able to accomplish a lot of them in a shorter amount of time. And where the technology is taking you is like being able to automate and provide you the productivity through artificial intelligence.
And machine learning and augmented. I mean, the next 10 years is going to be an exciting time. Whatever we think we've seen, I always like to remind people that for all our advanced technologies and for all our advancement, I mean, when you compare it to what's been written in the novels of science fiction, and that was written, say, 70 years ago, we're still in the black and white era of modern technology. The color, let alone HD, 3D, 4K, 8K of the technological world in terms of progress is yet to come, and so we're going to have a great time over the next few years living that.
We actually created a video for one of our user conference called Denodo Data Fest, opening video, in which we actually put a line in there. The number of patents that were issued by the US Patent Office, like this was more than 100 years ago. For example, to reach about 100 or 200 patents, it used to take them like 7 or 8 years. Now that happens within like 7 or 8 hours. So that's so much of innovation is going on. It's a logarithmic scale. It will increase, it will accelerate, and we need to keep pace, and we need technologies to get us there.
Absolutely, absolutely. So my second last question is to ask if you could please share some of the best advice you've received to help you get where you are today. To help you get where you are today.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, let me start that again because I just got a cough. So, and it's basically something from a teacher, a mentor, or something. But
sure.
So the second last question I always like to ask is if you could please share some of the best advice that you've received to help you get where you are today.
Okay. So the best advice for where we are actually today is in terms of being able to put the innovation into the product to be able to provide that productivity to the users, one, in terms of reducing the amount of time it takes to actually get the things done and the amount of resources. This all comes down to productivity. So people are worried about cost, people are worried about resources, people are worried about the time to get things done. So that's basically what we have actually enabled, taken that principle within our company. We have innovated our product to the point where companies can actually rapidly use our product to accomplish some of the business objectives much more faster. So that's where we are today.
Sure. And any advice that you've stood by throughout your career from a teacher or a mentor that has helped you to be a better person or be a better leader or manager that you can think of?
Sure. So for me, the biggest principle has always been in terms of being able to generate the results, right? You always need to think about the end in mind.
Yes.
There are many things that need to happen before. You need to think, what is actually comes, put yourself in others' shoes or, boots or whatever it is. And you need to think about the end result, and then you need to work towards what is needed to kind of get to that particular result. And that actually has helped me, even when I compose an email or something, I'll always state what exactly I want, then I'll come the explanation. It won't be the reverse. Yeah. So always start with the end in mind.
Excellent, excellent advice. It's like, how do you eat an elephant? One mouthful at a time, but you're going to eat that elephant, right?
That's right.
That's
right.
So it's like chunking problems down, and I don't think enough of us do it. And so my final question is, what's your final message to iTWire viewers and readers, and to your current and future customers and partners?
So I would encourage them to keep abreast of the technology. Technology is evolving much faster, and iTWire is doing a great job of bringing all this information. Consume it through reading, through this video, through podcast, or whatever way, but be always on the know-how. An informed person is definitely a better person out there, and I would encourage you to use all these resources in whatever way you kind of consume the information and make yourself a better knowledgeable person, I would say.
Well, Ravi Shankar, Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer of Denodo, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming down to Australia, and we hope to talk to you again in the future.
Thank you, Alex. This was great.
Thank you.